So the book is based on two brothers, and their parents get kidnapped, and the boys have to go and deliver a ransom down in the jungles of lowland Nepal, and they don't do very well. They get lost and they get tied up, and all sorts of horrible things happen to them. So at one point they catch up with the kidnappers, they deliver the ransom money, and then they get left tied up. And then they end up chasing the kidnappers to try and catch up and release their parents. The narrator is a bloke called Alex, who's about 15 or 16, and with him is his annoying little brother called James. Alex said, "We waded in at a place where the river-smoothed cobblestones showed through the shallow rapids. There were all kinds of colours. The sparkling water only came halfway up to our knees, but already the current made us unsteady and our feet slipped. It would be okay though, it wasn't that deep. 3/4 of the way across, the current was much stronger. It was getting seriously difficult. It was up to James's chest. He thrashed about wildly as he tried to keep on his feet. Each time he slipped, the river swept him further and further downstream and further away from me. I tried awkwardly to make my way over to get to him, to help him, to get his feet down again, but I was beginning to struggle too. Upstream, I saw 2 ugly lumps on the riverbank. They lazily slid into the water and disappeared with hardly a ripple. We wouldn't see them even if they came close until it was too late. Swim for it now, James. It's not far, I shouted. The bag weighed me down. I wasn't so confident anymore. I didn't know how much I could help James. He plunged forward. The current caught him and swept him away. He was splashing but afloat. I couldn't believe how quickly the river was taking him. James went under and reappeared way downstream. He was spluttering and choking. He went down again and didn't come up. When the river swept me off my feet, something gashed at my leg. It had got a hold of my backpack and was pulling me under, spinning me. I tumbled over underwater. My head hit the bottom. I got my feet down and pushed up for the surface. I grabbed a breath and was pulled down again and rolled over. I wasn't sure what was up and what was down. I was sure that it wasn't just the weight of the pack that was pulling me under. I didn't want to die, not like this. Does anybody know what it might be? Crocodile. Yes. A mugger crocodile, very good. Do we need to close the windows, do you think? Sorry. But I get ahead of myself. You can see the kind of thing that I wanted to write. Something a little bit exciting, something with a bit of wildlife in it, something with a bit of scenery in it. So I've always been passionate about wildlife and wild places, and even as a child I was fascinated by the tiny warfare that went on in the pond in our back garden. I went to Plymouth to study biology, and there I learnt how to identify the creatures of Dartmoor and Slapton Lea and the sea. I learnt to scuba dive, I did whitewater canoeing, I began caving, and I started doing cave rescue work. And I did a little research project on little insects that feed on bat guano called springtails. And I achieved my first publication in an obscure cave science journal. After graduating, I did a 6-month overland trip to the Himalayan region and continued studying dung-eating, cave-dwelling creepy crawlies. And I got lost in a cave with my friend Jill for 13.5 hours. I was rescued by a tea shop owner who found his way to us and rescued us. So I picked up a postgraduate degree in parasite biology at Oxford and managed to wheedle my way into medical school, partly by telling stories about my Himalayan adventures. And I organised my next adventure while I was a medical student at Southampton. That was an expedition to Madagascar. And the University Expedition Society introduced me to a rather nice engineer who just returned from Nepal. And our common ground led to better things. We had I organised an expedition to the Peruvian Andes and then back to Madagascar. And I was lucky enough to get my Madagascar book published, partly because I went off to live in Sri Lanka for a while and there was nothing better to do than write books, which was a very good place to sit and write and not be distracted by things like work and patients, because I wasn't allowed to work because there were 2 wars going on. So I married and went to Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Pakistan and back to Nepal, where our family grew, and I wrote some books about travel health. So there's a travel health book, and about travelling with families. So I did quite well on the publication side. So you'd think by now I knew how to write, but not so really. By this time, we had a family of 3 boys, and after about 11 years in Asia, we came back to Britain, and I came back to general practice in Cambridge, and I worked at a practice called the Laurels, which is the back of the Grafton Centre, and I revisited this idea of stories for children. So my dad's model was there in my head. I thought it'd be really nice to be able to tell a story that involved my sons. So I started writing a story based in Nepal, featuring my sons as the heroes, so Alex and James. The younger boy that I actually wrote it for is here in the room. He turned out to be a very good critic because the pace of the story was a bit slow, he sort of started yawning and not really being very attentive. And if I got too boring, he would tell me so. And if I got too repetitive, he would tell me so. And he was also very demanding of a story every night. So it didn't really matter that I was trying to hold down quite a stressful job. I was working in a practice where 11% of the population had severe mental health needs, and every now and again someone would become seriously unwell, and it would all be quite exciting for a while. The Primary Care Trust were trying to close us down, and I was given a misogynist practice manager who had me in tears at work. That didn't matter. Seb still wanted his story. So I was away, get home from work, forget about work, get on the computer, and I'd go off on a trip to Nepal. It was brilliantly therapeutic because I wasn't thinking about patients who were psychotic, and I wasn't thinking about patients who were unhappy. I was just thinking about having an adventure in Nepal. So I churned out a lot of words, and Seb seemed to like them. So it was very good for me, and I actually found that the writing was very therapeutic for me, as well as being quite fun to do. So over several months, I wrote a story set in Nepal, another story set in Nepal, and then one set in Madagascar. So I had an audience that I wrote for, but I still found it difficult. I sent off my stories to publishers, and they didn't really like it. Because writing for children is very tough. It's more difficult than writing for adults because children are much more demanding readers than adults. And you have to watch what vocabulary you're using, what you're assuming, the knowledge you're assuming in the population who are reading you. You have to think about there not being too much description. You've got to think about keeping the pace up all the time, but you've got to describe stuff, but not in too much detail. So, and it's interesting actually, everyone's very rude about Enid Blyton not being a very good writer. But actually, if you look at how she writes, her paragraphs are short. There are no long pages of wonderful description, which is what I would like to write. There are short paragraphs, there's a bit of description, there's a bit of conversation, and then there's some action, and it's move all the time. It's great. So, so maybe I'll read another little bit of story. So I noticed I got Tim's attention when I was reading. So another bit of story. So the boys were in pursuit of their parents, And they were going through Nepal, and Nepal has got some flat bits and it's got some mountainous bits. And the boys were in the company of someone called Ramdin, who was a grown-up, and a local girl called Ati. On and on we plodded, up and further up, and then I registered a deep rumble. Sorry, I'm going to go back and start a bit earlier. I do apologise. The four of us trudged up, stopping every hour to rest. We nibbled a few biscuits and took a few gulps of water. The valley bottom was a long way below us now. We continued to climb steeply, but still couldn't make out the top. Trees merged from normal-looking oak into weird kind of sparse forest. Trees had smooth, spindly trunks, which didn't seem to know which way they should grow. They kind of writhed about, but each wore superb white flowers. James said, "Hey, look, those trees look like that old tree we'd climb in Granny and Grandad's garden in 6 Mile Bottom, but there are lots of them up here." Atty gave them a Nepali name and said something about foreigners visiting and taking Himalayan plants away to English gardens. "Magnolias, that's what Granny calls them." "Yeah," James responded, absently, not listening as usual. The magnolia forests merged into pine. We were into proper snow and still climbing. Wind tugged at my hair. The effort kept us warm in this cold, desolate place, but how much further before we gained the crest of the ridge? On and on we plodded, up and further up. Then I registered a deep, distant rumble. I saw a tiny figure far away, waving frantically at us. Was he trying to signal something? Maybe it was about whatever was causing the rumbling. Atty and Ramdin looked puzzled too. The rumbling grew louder. Whatever it was coming for us, fast. The figure disappeared, and then I saw a massive wall of white powering down at us. There was nowhere to shelter. Atty shouted, "Run! This way! Come, quick!" She sprinted off at a pace I wouldn't have believed possible. We pelted after her, towards a few low-growing trees in a bit of a gully off to the side. Ramdin followed, but slowly. We ran, but this thing was fast and furious, moving at extreme speed. We weren't going to make it to the gully. I put on one last desperate spurt. It was no use. There was a deafening roar. It hit like a train. It was shockingly cold. It sucked the air out of me. My mouth was open, but I couldn't breathe. Things hit me. I choked as snow filled my mouth. Huge forces tore at me. I was flying, tumbling. It seemed icicles were stabbing right inside me. Over and over I flew. I plunged into darkness.